Okay guys, welcome to the Talking News. Please subscribe, push the like button right now guys, and don't forget to push that notification bell if you want notifications when I upload new material. So we're covering the MALEAH Davis story. I want to go over some details with you guys. Maybe you haven't seen some of it. So MALEAH Davis, the 4-year-old out of Sugarland, Texas, was last seen April 30th with her stepfather, and her stepfather's story is he was driving to the airport around 7 or 9 p.m. when a blue truck pulls up behind him. 3 Mexican men get out of the truck and they go over to him, knock him out, take him and his 2 children hostage, and all 6 of them ride around town all Friday and Saturday until Saturday at 6 p.m. where he finds himself and his 1-year-old son sitting on the side of the road. Somehow the 1-year-old did not run off, and he happened to wake up in time before he did, but MALEAH Davis was not there. So I want to go over all of these details today, plus everything where we're at the moment in this case. We're going to go over the fact that equusearch of Texas has had a few issues with people that are volunteering and searching for MALEAH Davis. They believe that they are being clumsy and possibly messing up their chances of finding any evidence against Darian Vince. We're going to also cover and go over a few clips of the chief where he's briefing the public. And then finally, we're going to talk about the case in general, what they found, what we know, and then kind of see what other people have been saying, what they've been speculating. We're just going to have a video full today. First, I want to cover who the Tim Miller is and why he takes searching so seriously. I can tell you right now that his story is probably one of the most heartbreaking stories I've seen, and it's full of crazy details. And so this video is going to have parts because I'm going to include so much. This guy is out there searching for MALEAH Davis. He takes it very seriously, and he's determined he's going to find her. But he has a problem with people that are going out there and volunteering. And we have to ask ourselves, why is he so upset? Because I think it's a good thing that people go out there and volunteer. But he thinks that they're being clumsy and they're doing it for attention. But guys, if you're out there volunteering, that is good. It really is. But if you're out there live streaming it, then you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons. Also, you need to get up with equusearch and let them train you how to search, because you don't want to mess up anything. But yes, people who go out there, we consider them heroes, and we're wanting to give them the spotlight they deserve. But when you go out there and give yourself the spotlight, that defeats the purpose, and it also says that you're not there to help. But anyways, let's go over why Tim Miller takes MALEAH Davis's case so seriously. Why is he mad at those people that found the cell phone and live streaming? Well, to know that, you need to know his story, and I'm going to share it right now. Tim Miller is the founder of Texas equusearch. If you look into his eyes, you can see that he depicts in a massive amount of pain, and he's carried this pain within for decades. He is a victim, just like MALEAH'S. Davis, his daughter was also murdered. And we're going to go over his story right now. But like I mentioned, if you look into his face, you can see he carries an overwhelming pain that he's not been able to distinguish in any way over these years. Tim Miller is from Texas, and if you know Texans, they are the type of people who are not afraid to face matters or to take things into their own hands. So in this Texas area, there are women that have vanished. Some say just vanished into thin air. Their bodies are never found. And all there are is pictures to say that these women ever existed. And before DNA and all these other things, there were times that these victims in Texas could not be identified, and so they were marked Jane Doe, and their fate is forever in the morgue. And all of these bodies found in Texas were found on near Texas I-45 freeway. This freeway goes through the coastal plain, through Houston's urban areas, and even the island of Galveston. And over the years, the road has earned a grim nickname among cops, crime buffs, armchair detectives, and it's called the Highway to Hell. And Tim Miller's daughter was one of those victims. But he did not sit down and rest. He didn't stay at home grieving. He decided he was going to become an investigator. He felt like the police were not doing enough. He was going to take things into his own hands. His daughter had left the house to go make a phone call to her boyfriend. Her name was Laura Miller. The problem is, she never returned home. In fact, she suffered from seizures, so they thought possibly that maybe she had a seizure, so they started searching the hospitals for his daughter. But they come up empty-handed. And as time went on, and like I mentioned, they didn't get enough help from the cops, he took this into his own hand. He was going to research, and he was going to find the killers or the kidnappers that took his loved one away from him. Was it homicide? He went on an adventure to find out. Laura was not the only person missing. Journalists and law enforcement officials believe that there was at least 30 women and girls who were abducted, raped, and murdered between the 1970s and the early 2000s. Sometimes they believe that the victims was a series of an overlapping, possibly unrelated killers who turned the area into kind of a Bermuda Triangle of violence and a sexual playground. And for 3 decades, killers stalked, hunted this area. And in recent years, thanks to part of the improvements in the forensics technology, and law enforcement agencies have arrested or named suspects in some of these killings. But sadly, many cases remained unsolved, including the case of Tim Miller's own daughter, Laura Miller. If you go to the equusearch website, you can see all the cases that they've worked on, and some of them include Andrew McDonald and MALEAH Davis, the missing 4-year-old out of Sugar Land, Texas. And all of this was created from back in 1984 when his daughter Laura was only 16 years old. She was abducted and murdered by an unknown assailant. Her death set Miller on a one-man crusade. This also led him to organize search parties that work beside police, investigate, working to solve not only Laura's case, but all cases of missing women in that area. He doesn't only work with murder cases, he works for people missing up all types of things. It includes dementia, toddlers that got lost, planes that disappeared overseas, and suspected homicides, of course. equusearch was actually founded in 2000, and that it was in Texas. It's a search and recovery nonprofit which helps assist with hundreds of missing persons cases and located more than 400 living people and 238 bodies. And that is according to the organization. His team has searched for missing people and their remains in every kind of environment: river, lake, retention pond, bay, bayou, canal, using every form of scuba divers or sonar to tiny robotic boats. And when he's not dealing with the water, he's looking under the earth. Once he dug the foundation out from underneath the house looking for bodies. He didn't find any, though he found a suspiciously body-shaped hollow in the earth. He's a contractor. He loves his animals. He has horses. He is always busy. He says if he isn't busy, his mind can get him in trouble. And if you were to meet him in person, Miller is 71 years old. He walks around with tons of energy, just pacing, and brown cowboy ropers. He's always got cigarettes hanging out the short shirt pocket, balancing a phone in the crook of his neck, and constantly dealing with phone calls from victims' families, FBI agents, and sheriff deputies. But according to an article, the only one case that Miller has never been able to close. And that one is the one that give him the reason to start this nonprofit. And that was his daughter's murder. So, here we go. 1984. When Laura went to use a payphone at a nearby gas station, the Millers had recently moved into a new house in League City, and their phone lines were not set up yet. Laura wanted to call her boyfriend, of course. Laura suffered seizures, so when she failed to come home, her parents' first impulse was to check the area hospitals. That yielded nothing, and Tim and Janet Miller turned to the police. Laura also had a history of depression and anxiety. Her great love was singing, and her self-esteem never recovered after she was humiliated by a seizure attack during a solo at her school Christmas recital. Because she had mental health problems and background, police investigators decided that and insisted on treating her as a possible runaway or suicide. Something is a huge mistake and often hurt cases on a daily basis. And there's a few cases I can name right now that are dealing with that title that they get. Initially, nobody noticed that Laura had disappeared for 11 months to the day after another woman from the same gas station while using the same payphone. Disappeared. Heidi Faye was a 23-year-old waitress, and on October 10th of 1983, she disappeared. On the 4th of April 1984, a couple of League City noticed their dog playing with something in the yard. It turned out to be a human skull. The dog had dragged the skull from an overgrown nearby oil field. Keyword oil field here, guys. On Calder, I hope I say this right, Calder, a desert on I-45, the feeder road, and brought it home to show the couple's toddler. Of course, that sparked the police to investigate the oil field where they did find the rest and the remaining of that missing girl and Faye's body. So police then do an investigation, and they find out that she had been beaten to death with a blunt instrument. The police had no leads. The family were left with their grief, and the rest of the world moved on. Of course, Miller heard about this story, and he rewound everything he remembered what happened to his daughter. He realized there was a connection there, and he took that connection to the police and the local press. They said Laura was a known runaway, Miller says. 35 years later, anger still ripples under the surface of his face. He said, Heidi Faye was a known drug addict. Tim was angered, and he was fired up. He had a clue, something he didn't have before, and it almost kind of gave him the pat on the back that said, you were right the whole time. Miller urged the police to search for his daughter in the oil field on Calder Road where Faye had been found. But the police refused. They didn't care. They ignored him, he said. They refused him permission to search the field himself. Does that sound familiar for those of you out there searching? And it says here that the League City Police Department declined his interview request. And this is what we're hearing other families complain about on these missing people's cases. We've heard it from Marlene Ochoa Lopez. We've heard it from Andreen. We've heard it from almost every case. That, in fact, the girl they just found, Amanda, what was her name? Eller, that was just found. The boyfriend says he had difficulty getting the police to work with him. 2 years later, there were some boys that were riding dirt bikes near the oil field and smelled a foul odor. They thought it was a dead animal. Turned out it was decaying body, 6 to 8 weeks dead, of an unidentified young woman known to this day as Jane Doe. She had been shot. Her body was propped under a tree about 150 feet from where Heidi Faye had been found. So it looks like, Tim was starting to put this together, and the police refused. And that's their job. They should have figured this out before Tim. But even more devastating, while they were searching that field for a second victim, police also came across a skeleton. And that skeleton was that of Tim Miller's love and life. And it was his daughter, Laura Miller. And when Tim Miller thought that his whole entire life was difficult. He faced something that he never dreamed he would have to face. Tim Miller had already, like I mentioned, had a tough life. And this is before his daughter disappeared. And as a child, he was abandoned by his parents, and he lived with a series of abusive relatives. When he grew up and had children, his adult life wasn't any better. So his infant son died in a crib. And a year before Laura was murdered, his brother killed himself. Through all this pain, he managed to endure, but Laura was what broke him. His life collapsed. God hated him. He didn't believe. He was punishing. He thought that God was punishing him for some reason. Miller didn't understand. He began drinking. He and Janet divorced. He sank into his anger and despair like a strangely comforting cocoon. And that's what this article says. He spent long hours replaying the circumstances of Laura's disappearance. Think about what he might have done differently. Tim sacrificed the only thing he had good going in his life, his wife, for something he had no control over. He kept replaying and fantasizing on how he could help his daughter. Some of those fantasies included revenge. Now, when his daughter's body was found, Laura appeared to have been dead longer than the jade doe that was sitting next to her. Because of her more advanced state of decay, the medical examiner was unable to identify the specific cause of death. Like the other two bodies that were also found in the oil field, Laura's was propped against a tree, and her body was facing the sky in a manner suggesting that the killer liked to return and admire his work. Miller began staking out the field. Night after night, he'd lay in wait with a gun, drinking and smoking in the dark, watching for Laura's killer to show himself. And at that time, he had no idea who might have done it. A man who lived down the road from the Millers when they lived in Dickinson, Clyde Hendrick, had recently served a short stint in prison for a strange incident that occurred the same year Laura was killed. Hendrick was a sociable guy, but he had a bout with jaw cancer. He used to be a very good-looking guy and was said to be a good dancer. He hung out at a nightclub, the Texas Moon, quite often, drinking and dancing with acquaintances. They introduced him to a 29-year-old woman, Ellen Beeson. And at some point that night, Hendrick and Beeson left the club together. The next day, she failed to show up to work. When confronted by authorities, Hendrick said that Beeson had drowned while skinny dipping, and he panicked and hid the body. The corpse was in a ravine near the Galveston Causeway, underneath the old sofa. Sorry guys. The Galveston County medical examiner, if I can speak, examiner ruled that her death was indeterminable. So Hendrick was convicted only of abusing a corpse, a minor offense, and sentenced to a year in jail. From Laura's boyfriend, Miller heard that Hendrick knew his daughter and sometimes talked to her when she passed his house. One time, she and some friends even apparently visited his house to buy pot. So Miller took his research and everything that he learned about Hendrick to law enforcement officers, pretty much ruling him a suspect on his own. Of course, police were not impressed by the circumstantial case. They actually just kind of brushed him away. In 1991, 5 years After they discover Laura's body in the oil field, horseback riders on a path through Calder oil field came across another female body, the fourth woman discovered there. She appeared to have been killed with a blunt instrument. Like Jane Doe, this victim could not be identified, so she was labeled Jeanette Doe. And how police did not grab onto this, because this is all the recipe for a serial killer. And whoever it is playing with the people in that town. So unlike Jane Doe, Laura Miller, and Heidi Faye, Jeanette Doe was laid out in an open, face down, leading the investigators to speculate that she was killed by a different person. Are you kidding me? Just because she was laid differently doesn't make it a different person. But Tim was still thinking that Hendrick might be responsible for the first three victims. By this point, the 25-acre plot had earned the name for the locals, and they were calling it the Killing Fields. Tim was very frustrated at this point, and he accused the League City Police and the Galveston County Medical Examiner of incompetence, noting that Laura and Jane and Jeanette Doe all probably died after authorities knew a killer was in the area. It was time Miller decided to open his own investigation. This is the beginning of equusearch. He tracked down the owner of the oil field and persuaded him to let Miller lease it for $10 a year. Tim was convinced at that point that somewhere in that clay there was a clue to who his daughter killer was. So he organized volunteers to canvass the area for bodies and evidence. He drained a pond. He combed the land with cadaver dogs. He attacked the land with a backhoe. Every time a dog signaled or volunteered, noticed a piece of litter, he had any kind of hunch, he would dig a hole. Oh boy, this is where Tim, I think, made his mistake. He should have just been more patient and sat longer. Soon the field was pitted with craters. It began to seem as if there was a war with the earth itself. That's what one writer says about, how the land began to morph once he leased it that $10 a year. But by then, there was a new development. Police finally had a suspect, and it wasn't Clyde Hendrick. It was Robert Abel, a retired NASA engineer, and he owned a ranch right next to the killing fields. People say that Robert was a bit of a strange person. Miller says, though, not one who could strike most people as menacing. A slightly built 60-year-old with thinning brown hair and a mustache. Abel walks stiffly because he had a bad back. He wears reading glasses, and he takes pills for his high blood pressure, coming from a journalist named Skip. This was written in 1999. Abel was a old Texan ranching come from an old Texan ranching family and a brilliant engineer. He was recruited by NASA shortly after graduating from a university. He helped design the Saturn rockets that got Apollo astronauts to the moon. That's pretty impressive. But in 1983, Abel, I hope I'm saying his name right, y'all know how I am with names I don't recognize, moved to League City. He leased 1,000 acres of pasture on Calder Road adjacent to the oil field And in 1990, shortly after retiring from NASA, he bought another 11 acres next to the oil field. He transformed the property into a Stardust trail rides, a recreational center where companies could hold Western-themed employee days, and people could take photos of their children riding their horses and ponies. However, Abel, after they discovered Janet Doe and the fourth body in the 6 years in the oil field, they were surprised by Abel's very enthusiastic, almost over-enthusiastic interest in trying to help with the case. He has lots of questions about the investigation, and they say that he always he wanted to help in any way that he could. He even loaned horses and a backhoe to aid the police to search the nearby land. But that doesn't strike me as odd, because I would be interested in helping as well, and so would Tim Miller. So, of course, wouldn't anyone be interested if 4 dead bodies were found right next to his property? Wouldn't he ask lots of questions? Wouldn't he offer to help if he could? But something about Abel struck police off. Okay, I hit my max on my phone, guys, so this is the end of part 1. I will work on part 2 when I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.